My name is Lou Fiore. I'm a hematologist-oncologist at the Boston VA. I'm the executive director of Maverick. Maverick is a Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Research and Development, intramurally funded research center. We have 4 major divisions. We do clinical trials, we do epidemiology, biobanking, and biomedical informatics. Over the past couple of years, we've been the main drivers of the Million Veteran Program, which is an effort to collect genomic information and EHR data on up to 1 million veterans. And more recently, we've been the driving force behind the Point of Care Clinical Trial Program. That program is attempting to introduce clinical trial architecture into usual care so that clinical trials can be done efficiently and scalably, part of a learning healthcare system activity that the VA is sponsoring. What we're attempting to do in Vision 1, the VA network New England, is embed in routine cancer care enhancements that would elevate the standard of care across the network and introduce research methodologies that will help us learn how to take better care of veterans while we're taking care of them. Not learn in a separate research apparatus, such as a clinical trial that will be constructed outside of the health system and managed by an entirely different staff of nurses and doctors, as is traditionally the case. In order to do this, we needed some support in the vision, first for the conceptual framework to do it, under the rubric of learning healthcare system. This has been supported by the Institute of Medicine to proceed to do this kind of learning in the healthcare system. And with financial support from the network director, Dr. Michael Mayo Smith, who is attempting to improve the quality of care and engage more veterans in research by introducing it into clinical care. We chose precision oncology as the arena to do this because we believe that precision oncology is going to be the first area in precision medicine that really bears fruit for improving patient care. And it does that because the ability to sequence the cancer genome allows us insights into what the causes and drivers are of cancers. And with those insights, pharmaceutical companies have been able to develop targeted therapies against the specific mutations that are responsible for the cancer. These drugs are far less toxic than traditional chemotherapy. We're learning that they're typically more effective than traditional chemotherapy. They're taken orally, and so they allow for patients with cancer to survive, if not longer, but to have a higher quality of life. To understand how effective these drugs are by introducing them to veterans in individual clinical trials is a Herculean effort, because there are many different mutations, and against those mutations, many different driver mutation drugs effective at attacking those cancers through the driver mutation mechanism. So if it's done in a one-off fashion, it would take forever to do this. However, if we can introduce the drugs in patient care, then we could understand the efficacy of those drugs in the real-world setting. And if we do it carefully and scientifically, and by scientifically I say randomize patients to get either traditional therapy or the new therapy, a clinical trial trick which adds to the scientific integrity of the study. Can we do that in usual care? Well, that's what the Point of Care program is all about, and that's what we have been doing. So it's really merging our past expertise, the current state-of-the-art in precision oncology, and injecting it into the clinical care ecosystem. I think that's the most exciting feature of the program. In trying to do this kind of research, where clinicians taking care of patients become researchers taking care of subjects, there are barriers in making that transition. The 2 most important and obvious barriers are, number 1, in order for a clinician to use an investigational drug, the drug needs to be approved by the institutional review board of the facility where the clinician is working. Well, it's quite a bit of effort for an IRB, institutional review board, to review a protocol. And therefore, it takes many months. If a patient presents with a cancer, we understand what's causing the cancer through genomic analysis. We have a drug available to treat them, but it takes 3 months to get the protocol approved. That's not going to work for the patient. So we have to somehow get around the regulatory burden of having drugs approved just in time for patients with cancer who could benefit from being on the protocol. And the workaround for that, or rather than a workaround, The approach that we're taking to solve that problem is to have the protocol approved by a centralized VA body beforehand, such that when a patient suddenly appears somewhere, at any VA across the country, we need only inform the IRB of record where the patient is located that the protocol has been reviewed centrally by the VA Central IRB. And at that point, the protocol does not need any further local review. And that makes it possible to institute protocols nationally and not have the protocol reviewed by every VA, which is an unrealistic burden. The second thing that has to happen is that that clinician taking care of that patient has to now assume researcher status, because an administration of a research drug requires special training, special credentialing. Again, it's unlikely that a clinician taking care of a patient will have time to do research training and get research credentialed. So in order to effectively give a therapeutic new drug to a patient, the clinician has to be able to have a waiver of these requirements for that one time, for that one patient. And so the question then is whether the central IRB will agree to waiver the requirement for the clinician having to train. It's called an engagement and research clause. And our argument is that these are potentially critical therapies for patients, and that some leniency should be given towards allowing clinicians to administer experimental drugs. This is already done under the rubric of compassionate use. So if a patient has a disease for which there's an effective therapy, but it's not available and it's experimental, IRBs have permitted doctors to administer it for compassionate purposes. And so we're hoping to institutionalize this as a national compassionate use protocol. So the two novel parts about the program would be the use of a central IRB and a waiver of local engagement research through compassionate use protocols. To make progress in precision oncology, it's clear what needs to happen. We need to have a large patient pool who are administered novel and exciting therapeutics based on their DNA mutations. We need to record what happens to the patients, what they respond well to and what they don't respond well to. We have to make these data available for analytics so we can learn what seems to be working and what seems not to be working. Then we must get that knowledge back to the clinician who's taking care of the next patient. The hope then is that by learning what happens to 100 patients with non-small cell lung cancer, we can better take care of the 101st patient. It used to be possible to let that happen in a clinician's head. A doctor who's taking care of 100 patients could take pretty good care of the 101st patient because there were similarities across 100 patients. Now, in the era of sequencing, each of those 100 patients is in fact unique because they each have a different mutation profile, and that is in fact the case. We've sequenced 42 patients and no two of them have the same mutation profile, which means that the patient sitting in front of a clinician is a unique patient. So no matter how many patients that clinician has treated, the clinician is not fully aware of how the patient sitting in front of him or her is going to behave. In order to make that happen, we need to have large numbers of patients, large experiences, whose data is aggregated, computed on, and whom the clinicians are informed about what to expect and what the best therapies might be. This could only happen in a healthcare system that has those requirements. Lots of patients, medical record that can be merged across many facilities, and the data can be put in a compute environment so that knowledge can be generated and fed back through an electronic health record. So I don't think there's a healthcare system better suited to pursue this than the Department of Veterans Affairs.